2 hours before H-hour, the bay heaves under a hard southerly, and the dunes of Gela hiss like kettles. Sand skates past scrub and empty crates. The church bell rings once, and is swallowed by the surf. Caporale Vittorio Ricci, Quarta Divisione, Livorno, rubs oil into the Breda mod. 37's feedway, with a rag that smells of lamp black and olives. The loader, Luca, holds a 20-round strip between thumb and forefinger, the way a farm boy grips a sickle. "Due on date," Vittorio says, 2 waves. That is what the lieutenant promised, and the promise is a kind of shelter men can carry in their pockets. Out beyond the white combers, faint rectangles appear and disappear, then reappear closer, steadier. Higgins' boats ride the swell and slap downward, their ramps glint pale and then dark again. The night has already scattered the parachutists. Word came down about lost beacons and wind, but the sea lanes, the lieutenant said, are predictable. 1 wave, 2 at most, then our counterblow in 3 columns will shove the rest away. Vittorio checks the oiler again. The Breda's jacket is cool, the tripod buried deep enough to take recoil without wandering. In the alleys of Gela, Maria la Barbera hides water in wine bottles and a loaf in the baker's flour bin. Her mother has turned the cellar into a dim infirmary. Sheets, salt, and prayer. From the east, the wind brings a low thunder that is not God, not quite. She imagines barrels big as church columns pointing inland. It smells of brine and kerosene. A mile offshore, Sergeant Jack Moreno of the 1st Infantry Division swallows bile and forces a grin at his squad. He taps the man nearest the ramp. "On the panel, then left. Keep the lane open." He has trained the hand signals until they feel like breathing. 8 round clips wait in bandoliers. The Browning assistant unspools a fabric belt with the care of a shoemaker laying thread. The coxswain yells 30 seconds. Jack thinks of a farmhouse in Kansas, the way wheat rolls when a storm comes, and decides he will ride that feeling onto the sand. The sea heaves once, twice. The boat's nose bites sand. The ramp slams down with a sound like a door kicked by a giant. For a heartbeat, the beach lies naked, grey, rippling, almost peaceful. Then the Breda coughs and the air fills with tracer bees and splinters of sand. Somewhere behind the dunes, a bell rings again, or maybe it is a shell. Vittorio leans into the gun, Luca feeds the first strip, and Jack steps forward into the water that will change them all. The rectangle drops and the world narrows to a triangle of sand, wire, and smoke. Jack is already moving, water to his knees, the M1 Garand steady against his shoulder. The first shot breaks clean and flat. A pebble leaps from the dune lip, and he knows the sight is true. "Panel!" he barks, and Corporal Fields splashes past with a roll of coloured cloth like a carnival streamer in the wrong place and time. They hit the berm hard and low. A grenade thumps into a pit where the tracer line begins. A scream shreds the rhythm of the Breda, and then the rhythm returns, slower for the heartbeat it takes to swap strips. Jack feels the ping of his empty clip and slaps a fresh N-block home. Around him, the squad breathes in unison, short gasps, cuss words in 3 states' accents, the small prayer of a private from Detroit who touches a pocket New Testament and then his helmet. Behind them, the beach is already a workshop. A beachmaster in a salt-white cap is shouting grids. Engineers claw at stakes and wire with Bangalore torpedoes. A Seabee rolls a dolly loaded with sandbags like a grocer in a storm. The second wave nudges the shallows, and the third idles just beyond, coxswains playing the surf like drummers. Jack glances back and sees the coloured panel snapping on its picket. The lane is open, which means the machine can breathe. Vittorio watches through the sight hood and tracks a shadow he knows is a man. The strip jumps twice. The loader's hand is bleeding where hot brass bit, but he lifts the next strip because that is how you keep a beach clean. Pressure, then more pressure. The lieutenant calls ranges that do not quite match the way the wind shoves smoke around. Somewhere to the right, An Italian gun crew cheers as a boat slews sideways and cuts a figure 8 before it rights itself like a fish. Jack's squad crosses the dune lip and spills into a hollow packed with scrub. He gestures 2 fingers, left flanking, and hears the reassuring buzz of a Browning on the berm. Engineers wave them across a cleared gap. He plants his boot beside the panel stake and thinks, not for the first time today, that whoever built a boat with a ramp might have won the war in a garage before anyone else came ashore. Doctrine says successive waves, each a little heavier, rifle and engineers, then chemical mortars, then tanks if God and the surf allow. He can feel that doctrine happening around him the way a farmer feels weather. It has weight, a shape, a schedule that does not care about one man's fear. He lifts his hand, and the line moves, and the wind tastes like ground glass and cordite as they push inland. Red light bathes the plotting room in a hush that is not quiet. Ensign Ruth Ellery stands over the table with her headset cocked to one ear, grease pencil in her fingers, the hull's vibration rumbling through her shins. Somewhere above, the SOC Seagull claws at the gale. Somewhere ahead, men she will never meet are lying as flat as men can. "Road column forming," the spotter says, voice thin with engine noise. "Farmhouse by the bend. Smoke. Request interdiction." Ruth repeats the grid and watches the plotter tick. The main battery captain leans in without touching her shoulder, proper form on a warship, and says, "Ladder by 50, commence rapid when on." She calls corrections to the director like a metronome. Over 100, left 50, over 50, add 100, mark. The first salvo is a silhouette felt in the ribcage more than heard. The second throws dust off the plot board. The third finds the road itself, and the stopwatch in Ruth's mind starts a different kind of counting, where minutes equal lives. Far inland, the vineyard lifts and settles like a rug. The mule teams that were meant to bring up Livorno's guns refuse the road and dive for the drainage ditches. Brave men swear and haul at traces anyway. A lieutenant who has never seen naval gunfire tries to square his map with the new geography and fails. On the beach, Jack and his squad feel the ground jump twice and then 3 times, lesser thunder under the great wind. "That's ours," someone says. The sentence contains relief and a frontier kind of pride, as if a distant town had sent its fire brigade. Ruth's log begins to fill the way a field fills with grain. Steady, inevitable, more than seems possible. She writes down a number and then another and does not think about sums. Sums are for after. By late afternoon, the book will show more than 500 rounds of 6-inch fired in support of the beachhead, an expenditure that, by Italian standards on that sector, could equal or exceed a division's day of artillery. It feels like an impossible statistic, and perhaps it is only improbable, but it is a faithful translation of what men on shore feel as air turns to iron. Between missions, she sips coffee that tastes like burnt rope and ocean salt. The captain nods once. The spotter comes back on, breathless with banking. "Road empty," he says. "Recommend shift to bridge." Ruth lays the new line, and the ship breathes out a broadside that sounds, to the men under it, like the future arriving in pieces. The braider sings at a pace a man can live with until he cannot. Vittorio finds the sight again after each recoil and lets the barrel walk so the stream paints across the lane, then back. Luca fumbles the oiler and grins, teeth dusty with wind-blown grit, then curses when hot brass kisses his palm. The first American rank hesitates at a sandbar and drops as if bowing. The second rank does not hesitate. It fans left and right the way trained men do when the sea spits them onto a beach, and the third seems to arrive with the same breath. For one savage minute, the field belongs to the defenders. Every dune lip is a mouth. Every path is a scab you can pick open if you keep your weight on it. Vittorio's lieutenant laughs without humour and calls for the counterblow to form by the hayricks. The runner goes with a heel-and-toe trot, head tucked like a bird in rain. Then the rhythm changes, and Vittorio understands tempo as a kind of weapon he does not own. His weapon has strips, each a pause, Theirs has belts, boxes, panels in the sand, a schedule written on someone's board. Smoke blossoms, honest and white, and then more smoke that smells chemical and clings to the inside of the nose. The tracer lines lose edges. Somewhere a mortar teams its pop with the surf so perfectly that Vittorio wonders if the sea itself has joined the enemy's cause. He drags the tripod an inch to reset his arc. Luca wipes oil from the strip like a man polishing an heirloom, a ritual that ought to bring luck because it brings friction. He cannot see faces now, only shapes. But he can hear voices, American English in different keys, Midwest flat, New York braided, a cracked drawl that sounds like movie reels from the cinema in better months. A Browning begins its brazen buzz near the breach and does not stop to breathe. Vittorio feels the anger that keeps men up on elbows when any animal would crawl. It passes. Something cooler takes its place. The hard precision of duty. Aim, squeeze, strip, aim, squeeze. A runner tumbles into the pit with ranges from the lieutenant, who is drawing arrows on a map that the wind keeps trying to tear away. "They are still coming," the boy says, as if reporting weather. "They are still coming," Vittorio repeats, and Luca nods like a priest. He takes the next strip and the gun chatters into smoke that tastes of cordite, oil and wheat set smouldering by strangers' shells. The wind, which should have been their ally, only drives the haze lower. When a lull finally comes, it lasts exactly as long as the time it takes to lift another strip from the ammo box, which is to say, no time at all. They step off in 3 prongs because that is what the order says, toward the road bend, toward the farmhouse, toward the low cut where the map shows a dry stream. The Livorno infantry move with the grim neatness of men who have drilled in gravel courtyards. Mule teams pull at the traces and blow foam, pack howitzers creak with every rut. A German liaison officer checks his wristwatch, curses the wind that stifles radios, and tells an Italian captain that timing is everything. The captain nods because courtesy remains a kind of armour even when nothing else will stop a shell. From high over the fields, the SOC Seagull leans into its turn until the wingtip seems to brush the wheat. Its observer has the uncanny knack of turning dots into decisions. "Column forming," he says. "Interdiction recommended." Aboard USS Savannah, Ruth traces the bearing with a pencil that has been sharpened down to a thumb. The main battery captain's voice comes calm through the speaker. "On the way." The ship breathes, and a line of impacts stitches the road in front of the lead platoon like a seamstress sewing shut a wound. Men who have never felt naval gunfire try to stand up inside it and fail. Wagon pins leap. A mule sits down like a tired man and refuses to get up until a blast lifts him, squealing into the ditch where he was heading anyway. Brave officers wave their caps because that is what brave officers do, and then stop waving because air is suddenly full of wood and stone and shrapnel. The road itself develops a stutter, 10 craters to 100 meters, and the column tries to move through the pauses as if they were gates that might still open for them. Jack, a mile away, feels the rumble as a pressure change in his sinuses. "Our ship," someone says reverently, as though a city had turned and decided to help. He sees a dust banner twist into a broken question mark and knows the counterblow meant for his sector has fallen apart without ever quite arriving. He gives the hand signal for forward because the only way off a beach is inland. The line rises with the weary grace of men who have discovered they can do this terrible thing again. Behind a rubble wall, Vittorio hears none of the orders. He hears the after silence, that thin ringing the body leaves for you when the noise stops. The lieutenant is shouting to gather at the hayricks. The map is still a liar. Vittorio checks the Brader's barrel and smells cooked paint. He does not know the numbers Ruth is writing into her log. He will never know them. But he knows a different arithmetic. The number of strips left in the box, the distance to the next fold of ground, and how long a man can crouch before his legs betray him. The church nave smells of damp stone, candle wax, and iodine. Maria La Barbera carries water in wine bottles because buckets slosh too much on broken tiles. American corpsmen move like men who have rehearsed this. Ponchos strung as curtains, plasma bottles hung from broom handles, a table cleared for dressings. One boy on the pallets has a face the colour of porcelain and an accent Maria can barely place. "Jersey," he says softly when she asks. He smiles because she is afraid, and he knows it. A Navy man with a Red Cross brassard kneels by an Italian private whose trouser leg is stiff with blood. "Hold that," he says in schoolroom Italian, pressing sulphur into the wound. He snaps open a chocolate bar with his teeth and breaks it into 2 blunt pieces. The taste is wrong and wonderful, like chewing a holiday. Outside, wind pulls at the shutters and sets them clapping against the stone like hands. The gunfire that had seemed constant now arrives in pulses, as if a giant far away were beating a cadence on the town. Maria has never seen abundance used this way, food as medicine, sweetness as a bridge. She watches a corpsman tear open a morphine syringe with practiced fingers and wonders how many of those little glass tubes exist in the world. The answer, though she cannot know it, lives on ships lined up to the horizon, Liberty hulls, 2,710 of them built in wartime, a number that would sound like a misprint if you printed it on bread wrappers. The pipeline feels like myth until a Seabee shoulders in with a crate stenciled MED and another with RATIONS, and both vanish into hands before she can read them twice. In the street, a Seabee dozer grinds past, pushing rubble into neat humps that will be roads by nightfall. A beach party forms a human chain to pass crates marked with stencils that read the same in any language: ammunition, rations, med. Jack's squad comes in on the run, sand in their eyebrows, canteens slapping, and collapses in a pew for exactly 30 breaths. Then the sergeant is up and the line goes out again because the work is heavier now that it is possible. Vittorio helps carry his friend Carlo to the porch, where a doctor waits with the weary courtesy of a man who has said those sentences too many times today. Carlo's hand closes on Vittorio's sleeve, a child's grip. "Ancora?" he says, half smile, half disbelief. "Still coming." Yes. Even now, with smoke lower and shadows longer, boats nose the surf and disgorge pallets and people. The impossible truth takes shape in Maria's mind, that a single American morning can bring more order than a week of mule carts and apologies. Later, as dusk slants across the nave, a corpsman lays his palm on the chocolate wrapper and smooths it flat as if it were a flag. Maria thinks of the boy from Jersey and of the men from Livorno and decides that the world is changing in front of her and that the change tastes like sugar and salt and steel. They were supposed to be ghosts on a road, a liaison of dots that never quite joined. Instead, the rangers on the ridge and the paratroopers in the cuts near Piano Lupo stood as if holding a hinge against a door the wind was trying to slam. Jack's squad moved in a crouch from wall to wall, eyes tracking hand signals that felt like second nature now. He could hear the clipped voices of airborne sergeants whose radios had died and then been reborn when a crate came up from the surf with fresh batteries like rainwater in the desert. The ridge smelled of busted time and hot metal. Somewhere back toward the beach, a chemical mortar popped and threw a clean curtain of smoke that made the whole hillside seem closer and farther at once. A German armoured car nosed around a wheat stook, turret hunting for a target that would stay fixed long enough to hate. The doctrine said tanks and armoured infantry together, like bones and sinew, but the wind had chewed the signals into nonsense and the infantry lagged behind the steel. Jack felt the old fear of being looked at through glass and pressed himself flat until the armoured car took 2 nervous sniffs and backed out of the field like an animal that had smelled wolf. A ranger captain with a face like a busted anvil grinned at Jack without humour and shouted, "Hold the road!" The ship's got you. The ship had them because Ruth had them. In the plotting room, the grease pencil left a ladder of marks that led salvos up to the ridgeline and then beyond, where a road curved like a question mark toward Neshemi. The spotter's voice came tired and exact as a clock. Shift, add, fire. If Jack's world was measured in strides, Ruth's was measured in seconds and yards, and between the two measures a shape emerged that looked suspiciously like a plan working in a storm. By noon, the line was no longer thin, so much as elastic. A runner found Jack and handed him 2 spare radio batteries without ceremony, as if the surf had simply decided to provide. He checked the handset, got a clean squawk, and felt a strange relief, not because they were safe, they were not, but because the bridge between men and guns and ships held. In the cut below Piano Lupo, a private propped his helmet on a stone and watched a white panel snap on a stake below. He had never loved a sign more. Late in the day, someone yelled that tanks were coming ashore. The sentence felt like a camp rumour until the ground began to say yes with a new vibration. Steel on wood, steel on sand, steel on purpose. Jack looked toward the beach and saw a silhouette bigger than any man rise out of the spray and keep coming. The first Sherman came off the LCT as if it had been built to be wet. Water sheeted from the glacis, tracks clanked over the ramp's last rib, and the engine note settled into a promise that men could lean against. Jack's squad ran up alongside and slapped the hull like a team greeting a horse before a pull. The tank commander, goggles white with salt, banged the turret with a wrench and pointed with 2 fingers to a hedgerow that had been trouble since morning. The gesture was half courtesy, half order. Jack's nod was both acknowledgement and gratitude for a universe in which armour could arrive on time. They rode 30 yards on the rear deck and jumped, a precise little ballet in boots and grit. The 75 spoke and cut a hole in the hedgerow big enough to put a door in. Men went through the door and made it a room. Behind them, another tank coughed dry and swung its turret with the unhurried confidence of a thing that knew it had fuel, shells, a mechanic, and a spare part somewhere within a boat ride and a radio call. On the dune line, a dozer grunted and laid steel mat that promised trucks would have a road before sundown. Vittorio watched the turret traverse towards the place his platoon had been told to form and felt the exact instant when a plan became a memory. The lieutenant's map was already a museum piece. New roads were being written by blade and track, and the old arrows no longer pointed anywhere a man could walk. He aimed at the tank commander and squeezed. The sight picture jumped, and he lost the line. When he found it again, the tank was already rolling, as indifferent to the sand as a ship is to water. The naval guns shifted their thunder deeper as the first American field batteries got ashore and opened with the smaller, flatter voice of land artillery. Ruth logged the change in missions with the neatness of a woman balancing a household ledger. Interdiction now, bridges and crossroads, keep the outer ring shaking while the inner ring grows teeth. The plotting room smelled of coffee that had known too many reheats and the sweetish tang of hot bakelight. She lifted her pencil for a breath and thought of the math teacher who had told her that numbers were just another way to speak clearly when fear made mouths clumsy. Jack felt the net knitting, infantry and armour, radios that worked, smoke when needed, food that appeared. He saw Vittorio only as a flash of a helmet and a muzzle flame in the corner of his eye. He did not know the man's name, or that he loved the smell of orange blossoms more than any Italian could admit. He only knew that a tank was here and another behind it, and that the door in the hedgerow had become a hallway leading inland. By mid-afternoon, the beach had turned into a machine shop with waves. A drowned truck, nose down in a trench of its own making, became a landmark as useful as a mile marker. Men said, "Left at the dead Dodge," and nobody smiled. A beachmaster with a whistle like a judge's temper stood on a crate and redirected LCVPS with arm signals that belonged in semaphore books. A CB dozer wore a necklace of rope and net, shoving crates into berms that looked like sculpture until you realized those shapes were roads and revetments pretending to be art. Jack came down to the line of surf for 6 minutes. He counted because a sergeant's wealth is time and he has so little of it, and watched a gang lay pierced steel planking that turned muck into traffic. An LST opened its jaws and belched trucks that coughed once, twice, then drove straight onto the new surface like a film run at double speed. Ammunition boxes walked themselves inland in human chains. Water cans stacked themselves into pyramids. Someone chalked a board with the next wave's cargo, and the chalk squeaked like a promise. The rhythm had settled into a confident swing. Engineers blew new lanes through entanglements. Beach parties set up coloured panels so precise that an airplane could have landed if you dared bring one this low. A forklift, God bless the man who thought to bring a forklift to war, danced between piles with the indifference of a cat. Vittorio, crawling a field edge with a runner, watched the inbound procession and felt the slow acceptance that eats at the edges of belief. Even if we break 2 boats, 3 more come. Even if we burn a truck, 10 more find the road by smell. Numbers would be written later by officers with good pens, but the truth lay in hands. In some hours, the Americans would land more tonnage than Livorno's pack trains could haul to this sector in a day, a comparison that sounded like brag until you watched a mule stop dead at a crater and refuse the conversation. The impossible statistic did not live on paper. It lived in the way a dozer made a road where yesterday there had been sea, in the speed with which a radio battery replaced silence with a voice, in the simple indecency of abundance arranged with grace. Ruth's ship moved fire outward and the horizon inward, the anchorage tightening like a fist that had discovered it could close without trembling. Jack checked a manifest with the beachmaster and saw his own resupply listed as if he were a customer in a store that knew him. "You're up next wave, Sergeant," the man said, already pointing 2 other men toward 2 other problems. The system did not love Jack, but it respected him, and that felt better than any kind of affection a soldier could ask from a storm. As dusk drew a line across the surf, the beach kept breathing, in and out, never out of breath. Night hammered the noise into something like order. Ruth rubbed her thumb across a smear of graphite on the gun log and read the column of numbers as if it were a psalm. The day's entries stacked up until they seemed like fiction. Salvo counts, corrections, bridges cut, roads closed, the fat numerals of 6-inch rounds expended. By any humane standard, it was excess. By any soldier's standard, it was prudence. She wrote another line, over add fire, and heard the familiar shudder that felt absurdly like the ship's kind of laughter. Below the ridge, Jack shared a stale biscuit and half a cigarette with a boy who had been 17 last week. "We're still here," he said, and the boy nodded because acknowledging a simple miracle can keep a man sane. The ground still jumped now and then, but the jumps were farther away, a polite courtesy the big guns paid to smaller ones coming ashore. The first American field batteries had emplaced and were firing with the flatter voice of land artillery. The ship guns shifted to deeper errands that only Ruth's board could see, and the board was as busy as a metropolis at rush hour. The counting would not end in the plotting room. Others would tally crates opened, gallons poured, rations issued, morphine syrettes used, and somewhere someone would realise that a single afternoon's naval fire in this sector approximated or exceeded what an Italian division's artillery might expend over a full day. Ruth did not write the comparison. Comparisons could offend men who had done their best with mules and courage. She only wrote the truth she could prove, rounds downrange, corrections given, effects observed, friendly lines intact. Vittorio lay in a ditch that had been a footpath yesterday and listened to the night find its old voice again. Crickets, a dog, the distant wash of the surf, the occasional crack of a rifle like a door shutting 2 houses away. Carlo breathed beside him with the wet rattle of a man whose chest disagrees with shrapnel. The lieutenant had gone to find orders and had found only rumours. In a pocket, Vittorio had a stub of pencil and a folded stamp he would never use. He thought of writing to his mother that the Americans had brought a city with them, a floating one with dentistry and streetlights and more bread than his town could bake in a month. He did not write because a man must conserve paper the way he conserves faith. Ruth closed the log and stepped onto the weather deck. The barrels ticked like cooling kettles. Somewhere forward, a boatswain's pipe sang a high, sweet note that would not have been out of place in a church. She looked at the coastline, now a smudge with lanterns, and felt the strange, humbling certainty that numbers had saved men she would never meet. Dawn thinned the dark until it let go, and the ridge looked small in the honest light. Jack led his squad along a wall that had been shaped by hands 3 generations ago and felt, for the first time in 2 days, something like future tense enter his bones. To the east, a windsock at Ponte Olivo snapped to attention, red and white in air that no longer tasted like a file on the tongue. The road beyond the airfield lost its lurching crater-to-crater gait and smoothed into something you could call a route without lying. This was how it worked when a plan survived its first meeting with a shoreline. The lodgment became a springboard, the beach a port, the line an argument the enemy could no longer win at this volume. Time shifted forward. 12 July became 14, then 20 in the space of a paragraph. Headlines in Rome grew fevered, then incredulous. Maria heard that Mussolini had been dismissed on the 25th, that a king's signature could change weather. She stood in a doorway and folded a newspaper twice, 4 times, until the words were a small square she could lose in her palm if life went backwards on her. Some numbers belonged to the hills, not the ships. Across Sicily, Axis battle casualties rose into the tens of thousands and prisoners into the 100,000 range. American losses were counted in thousands, grief in every company, and yet a ratio that told a different story about replacement and resolve. Convoy times in the Mediterranean eased. Captains slept a little easier. Steel moved the way water moves when a dam's gates lift. German commands shifted, redeployed, wrote critiques in clean staff hands, incorrect armour tactics here, insufficient infantry there, as if gaps in doctrine could be patched with nouns. Vittorio, now a prisoner with clean bandages and an ache he could not name, sat on a curb while an American GI handed him a cigarette and a look that contained no hate. The generosity bewildered him more than the steel had. He thought of scarcity as a kind of education men had endured together, and of the way these men seemed to have been schooled in an opposite. Abundance disciplined into schedules, compassion that carried inventory. Jack walked the runway and thought of the first ramp hitting the first ripple of sand. He imagined a line drawn from that moment to a boy somewhere in Kansas reading the news that Mussolini had fallen. Ruth, from her ship's rail, watched flights of friendly aircraft land where yesterday only dust devils played and felt the ledger tilt another degree toward the ridiculous. That a few days of ordered violence at a beach could reorder a peninsula's politics, history would simplify it. Men who knew would not. The sea was the same and not the same. Foam climbed the sand and erased footprints that should have been carved in stone forever. Jack broke a hard biscuit and handed the bigger half to Maria because she had given him water when water tasted like plastic and fear. Across the road, prisoners sat in the shade, their shoulders making a roofline of fatigue. Vittorio among them, his eyes on his friend Carlo's wrapped chest and his thoughts on an orchard that had not asked to become a battlefield. Ruth leaned on Savannah's rail and felt the ship's residual hum, the ghost of work in steel. What the waves had meant became visible now that the noise had dimmed. Doctrine made flesh, successive echelons without pause, naval gunfire as instant land artillery, logistics as the third arm in a 2-armed fight. The numbers stood like statues behind the actors, Liberty ships built by the thousands, M1 rifles by the millions, a single ship's afternoon of fire that rivaled a division's artillery day. Impressive to say aloud, decisive to live under. If an enemy officer called it waste, Jack would have nodded gently and said that a man's life is the most conservative thing a free nation can spend to save another. Maria thought of the chocolate bar and the morphine glass, and the way a dozer had made a road where her childhood had held a picnic. She understood that generosity could be a weapon when it moved faster than malice. Vittorio understood that courage is not a currency that can buy ammunition when the vault is empty. He had not lost because he lacked a heart. He had lost because he had fought a country that could replace a broken radio in an hour and a broken bridge in a day. Ruth closed her eyes and saw the grease pencil ladder again, corrections like the notes of a hymn. She would learn later that the template they had proved here would be repeated at Salerno and Anzio and, writ large, at Normandy, where waves would arrive as if the ocean had decided on democracy. The American genius was not mystery, it was method. A welder's bead in a shipyard found its way to a foxhole as surely as rain finds a river mouth. The last detail a reader might not believe was the one the veterans never stopped repeating, that in a single morning, properly arranged, America could land more order than an enemy could replace in a week. It felt like arrogance until you stood on that beach and watched the horizon produce more horizon, until you counted not the dead, but the saved. Jack raised the biscuit in a little toast to nobody and everybody. The tide came up and erased their footprints again, as if to say the beach remembered everything and advertised nothing, and that the real memorials were the lives pushed forward by men who had learned how to make waves keep coming.